What up, my homies? We're gonna be talking about elves.
Elves, Master Frodo. I dearly want to see elves.
Those crazy things that are just all over the place. This is a good point. It was brought up by a listener. Uh,
Yes,
about
elves
elves.
are all over the gaming world, the book world, literature. They're even showing up in Shakespeare. What's the deal with elves? And are you pro-elf or anti-elf? This is a debate we've raged on since we were youngins playing D&D. A lot of anti-elf bigotry coming from some of our peers.
Yeah, my first character that wasn't myself because I was so terrified to play any fantasy creature because I heard the D&D was from the devil.
You
Was
were
an
right.
elf. Was an elf blade singer.
Named Edge Bladekill.
Yeah, I was. I wasn't the most creative of individuals. I was like, "What are elven names?" And you guys were like, "Well, there's a whole book of them." And I was like, "Nah, fuck it. I'll just be Edge Blade Kill. That makes sense."
It captures the grace and beauty of the elven culture perfectly.
Yeah, but what is the elven culture, man? That's like the whole thing. What the fuck?
Yes.
There's different kinds of elves. There's just.
What's the deal with elves?
I think that the modern idea of elves came from someone going, "Hey, what's some things that you don't really like about yourself?" And you're like, "I don't know. I mean, I guess I could be more handsome or smarter, or I could be, more in shape. I could live longer. Could,
I'm kind of clumsy.
yeah, a little clumsy. I could be more cultured. I don't know, stuff like that. Or our cities are a little shitty and dirty. Maybe they could be better. Wish people cared more about one another. I wish I had magic." And he's like, "Okay, all those things. That's going to be an elf. Just everything you wish you were.
He's like, you said pointy ears, right? I did not say pointy ears. Yeah, pointy ears. It's
Those
on there
two.
now.
Those two."
It's on there. Yeah. So elves been around for a long time, but not in the form that we know them as now. The modern idea of the elf really was shaped into being by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. The old Tollers, as C.S. Lewis used to call them.
The old what?
Tollers. What's up, Tollers?
Oh, Tollers.
The affectionate nickname from the much less skilled writer that was C.S. Lewis.
Oh yeah, those books do not translate well to adulthood. I read them when I was a kid, and I was like, "These are so magical." And now in
Ah,
adulthood,
geez, it's Santa Claus. It's amazing.
I know, what the hell? What the hell? He shows up out of nowhere, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm Santa." And I was like, "What? Wait a minute."
Tolkien gave him a lot of shit over that. To be fair, they were in a book club basically together where they'd hang out and kind of discuss what they were writing, and he was, I think they were called the Inklings or something. I have to look it up. I forget, but yeah, C.S. Lewis would definitely give him shit, or Tolkien would definitely give C.S. Lewis shit. He's like, "Oh, really? Santa showed up in your mythology that you're creating for this modern day? You're gonna put Santa in there?"
Jingle bells, and when he was being hunted, or when they were being hunted by someone bad, what happened to them? And more importantly, there's a good, cool story thing that can happen. This is really technical, I know, David, but there's a good, cool story thing that can happen.
That's the literary term. Yes, continue.
Where your heroes, right? Whether you're drafting a campaign or writing a story, where your heroes come into the power, the MacGuffin, or whatever it is that they need, right? It shouldn't be Santa. Like, it can be anything interesting. Maybe your father's sword. Maybe they find it in a tomb and it's a legendary weapon, or anything. But no, they got and the shit they got was lame. That one girl was like, "Hey, put this. This is a little potion thing you can give to people." That's the lamest thing ever. I'm like, "You mean I can't use my thing until someone dies?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's when you get to use your thing." That's the equivalent of getting a CPR heart jumper. Piece of shit. It sucks. You're like, "Oh, I don't really want to be around when loved ones fall down and die."
Yeah, it's like when you have a talent tree and one of them is when shit is really bad disactivates. You're like, I don't want that. I want something that's good all the time, not just when I'm about to die.
I know. So what am I supposed to do if a bad guy comes? I'm like, wait until you die and then drink this. Like, oh,
Then you're equally fucked as you were before you died, but at least you're not dead.
yeah. What if they torture me instead? He's like, we don't have one of those. So
Sorry.
you gotta full on die.
So elves predate Tolkien, but he's the one that kind of popularized their modern appearance. He was pulling a lot of things out of Germanic influence and some Celtic influence and a lot of Nordic sort of stuff. For example, in the Book of Lost Tales, there was a diminutive fairy-like race of elves that had once been a great and mighty people, but who had diminished as men took over the world. Sounds familiar? And but before Tolkien, elves were basically seen as sort of like small knobbly little gremlin-looking people who would, they'd steal children and curdle milk and leave changelings in their place. So it was more like what we would think of as the Fae now in a modern sort of fantasy RPG.
Santa's elves, kind of like that.
Yeah,
kind of
Keebler elves. Which, by the way, Tolkien was super salty about like that perception of elves. He hated that.
Which one, Keebler? Or
yeah, the whole Keebler kind of like little shoemaking elves that live in trees and make cookies and whatever else. Like he just said he was not a fan of that depiction of elves.
Oh, probably not the way he made them. I mean, I remember in second edition when I came, and then you were like, here's a book on elves, and I started reading it. I was like, what the fuck? Why would everybody not want to be elves?
Yeah, the complete book of elves. I remember that.
It's like, they have great cultures, and they have dogs too, but their dogs are better. And they have parties, and their parties are better. And they use weapons too. They're very peaceful, but they also use weapons. And when they do, they're better than you.
They love life, but they're also the best at killing.
Yeah, yeah. They can shoot you from afar, but if you get close, doesn't matter. They're also better with swords. I'm like, oh, well, then I'll hit them with magic. And they're like, better than that too. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'll be a druid. And they're like, better than that too. They're better at all that.
What else do you want to be? Well, let me tell you about the elven gods, which are better than the human gods. They're called the Seldarine, and they're awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Or if you're like, oh, well, then I'll just dress up in a bunch of armor and I'll fuck them up. And it's like, well, that's okay because they have blade singers, which will tear your shit up. Like, well, can I do anything to them? It's like, no. In fact, if you make something up, I'm going to make something up to beat it.
Yeah,
like, it's so shitty.
The elves were depicted as the my dad can beat up your dad arguments.
Yeah.
Well, my dad knows karate, and he's got a black belt in all the karates. All the karates? Yeah. Yes, every kind.
Oh, well, my dad also took grappling. Yeah, he's got black belts in all those too. Oh,
yeah, shit. He actually trained in the kind that beats grappling, so that's fine.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the earliest exposure I ever had to elves was actually through Shakespeare. If you think about Titania and Oberon, you remember Midsummer Night's Dream? We had to read that in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at that point, at least this Victorian kind of idea of elves, they were very... the Fae were sort of this amoral prankster kind of, but just very powerful, and the only time they interact with humans is to just fuck with them and see what happens.
Yeah, I like that one. That's like kind of the 5th edition D&D or 4th edition D&D elves. Or
right.
The Eladrin, that's right.
Yeah, that depiction, what I liked about 4th edition, and we might be jumping the gun here chronologically, but what I liked about 4th edition was how they tried to bring back a lot of that sort of otherness that the elves were supposed to have.
Yeah, and because the only thing in like the 2nd, 3rd edition it would say characteristically it would always say the word aloof. It would just be like, they're aloof, but they're awesome. And when they do care, they care more. And I'm like, oh, come on. What is it? And that bugged me in the Tolkien thing, too, because it was like, this is made out of Dwarven. They're master craftsmen. I'm like, awesome. And it goes, but this is Elven. It's better. And I'm like, oh, come on. What do they not do? What do they not do better?
Right. Now, now, going back to Tolkien, because he's the one that kind of made them into the overpowered divine angel-like beings. In fact, one of the influences on Tolkien, there's a lot of, Christian eschatology going on. And some have theorized that the elves represent the state of men of Eden who had not fallen yet. Similar to humans, but fairer and wiser, with greater spiritual powers, keener senses, closer empathy with nature, freed from human limitation, immortal, with wills directly effective for the achievement of imagination and desire. But I ran that by my my resident Tolkien expert, Michelle, who we've had on the show before, and she actually has a different take on Tolkien's elves.
What are you talking about? I couldn't help it. Go ahead, please.
We were talking about it just the other day.
So that isn't accurate then.
It's overly simplistic. For the elves, death was not exactly a punishment. This whole immortal thing. So the elves and men, they're both children of Ilúvatar, and they call death. Sometimes they call that the gift of Ilúvatar because the elves actually experience their fall long before men do. So it's not that they're just this pre-Adamic, this pre-Eden kind of society. They fell before men did, and men don't really have a wholehearted fall in Tolkien's mythology. They're on equal footing. They're just created differently. And the elves are more skilled and developed than men, but they're fallible. For a while, Tolkien was using the word fairy with a capital F, Faerie. And when you see it spelled that way, for me, it makes me think of that kind of fae that we were talking about,
Yeah.
like the Feywild and like the strange stuff where you have to leave pots of honey by trees so that the elves won't come and curdle your milk, like all that cool kind of folklore stuff.
Yeah.
But he ultimately abandoned the term fairy because of the diminutive Tinkerbell fairies, and there were just too many associations he couldn't overcome. But he did want to denote otherness, elegance, near archangelic qualities. But the fact that elves are immortal is not a gift. Again, death is the gift in Tolkien's world, and the elves are. That's why they started worshiping Morgoth. That's at one point the humans, because they become kind of death obsessed because it was such a gift from the release of like the toils of the world. But the
It's pretty
elves are
impressive.
tied to the fate of Middle Earth, which means the way they experience their fall out of bad decisions is multiplied way more than the short mortal lives of men.
That's sort of like a business interview, though. Oh, well, what's my weakness? Oh, well, sometimes I live too long.
Too good.
Things suck more.
She says that elves are more tied to the earth in the long haul, and that's why they're less tied to earthly concerns in the short scheme, like eating, sleeping, clumsiness, like gravity. Walking across the snow. So like these short term things are kind of less have a hold on them. But that's kind of Tolkien's vision of how they are. They're so deeply connected to the entire fate of Middle Earth that their race's mistakes, the future of the other people, they're so other because they might appear indifferent, but they're not. We know this because they kick ass at hospitality, or at least Elrond does. He has like the best hospitality. And then there's the whole Noldor versus Sindarin subcultures, that come into play.
They so whenever I was looking up some stuff on this, I found this, TV tropes.
Mm-hmm.
They have an article called "Our Elves Are Better."
Yeah,
and it's hilarious. It's the quote that it opened up with is from a Terry Pratchett novel, and it says, "Everything you can do, elves can do better. Elves are much better at everything than you." And the opening line is, "Elves are many different things to many different people, but it's important to remember the one thing elves always are: better, better than you, better than me, and even other elves, especially other elves. They're also quite aware of that fact, and they'll let you know it again and again, and you won't argue about it most of the time. After all, they've been quite around for a lot longer." And it goes on to talk about the different kinds.
Yeah, like the high elves are better than you, but they're better at this way, and the wood elves are better at you because they're better at nature.
Yeah, yeah. And then it's like their civilizations are cleaner, their cities are cleaner. They don't have like homeless. There's just nothing that faces your problems. Do they have? They're better at weapons. They're better at making stuff. They're better at, like, elven craftsmanship is amazing. Their food's better, like that bread that they eat. Yeah, and then it goes through each of the different kinds. But basically, any place like sea elves, wood elves, no matter where they are, they're better than you are. Like if you're a ranger,
which is weird because the humans are supposed to be the adaptable ones, right? Like that's their thing, is they can adapt to different climates. But it's like, all right, we've adapted to the harsh climates of the ocean. We've got these ships, we can sail, we've got island culture. It's like, yeah, the elves got there first, and they're better adapted because they can breathe water. So good work.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's just not my favorite thing. It even talks about space elves. It's like, well, so basically just think of elves, or think of elves in that land, but now they're in space. They usually are like scholars whenever, which, why would they be scholars? Well, because in space type things, unless it's like Warhammer 40K, which is kind of a dystopic idea, most of the time it's a utopia. Like look at Star Trek, where the legend is that they've basically already figured out how to make their own food. All human comforts and human problems are solved at this point, including illness. There's that one where they finally catch this kind of cold thing while the away team's down on the Earth. But the idea is that, they were like, oh, being sick sucks. We never did this. But even then, you got space elves and they're better. Like you got the Vulcans are just badass.
Yeah, the can't argue with elves is a related trope, and it says they are taller, thinner, prettier, more graceful, better read, more intelligent, more environmentally conscious, more socially progressive, less aggressive or confrontational, and better craftspeople while being better warriors. Oh, and they're magic.
Yeah.
But then it says the only quality elves seem to be lacking is humility. So when authors try to sort of arbitrarily give, and I hate this is one of the things I hate about fantasy, is that we tend to get lazy, and instead of writing characters, we just write a race, and then every member of that race is that character. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying like, oh, this character's proud, but he's really into art, they're just like, all elves are really proud and into art. And so
Yeah.
the one flaw that makes you an interesting character for elves is that they are lacking in humility. They're too perfect. They can't resist lecturing humans. They're always sniffing disdainfully and being snooty.
No, there's but even that's up for debate. From that TV Tropes article, it says many see elves as only enjoyed by munchkins or those who wish to see themselves better than everyone else in every facet. But others claim that elves are above such things, which, and then this is the quote from them, which really only makes things worse. Can you really claim to be above being above people? So shitty. Anyway, yeah. So no, they may be even above being above people.
I remember that high elf that goes, elves usually share the following traits: human-sized or sometimes smaller. Exception: high elves are usually taller but slimmer, just to emphasize their inherent superiority.
Oh, and I love how elves are just inherently racist. I mean the concept of elves. You never see a black elf, and if you do, it's evil and lives underground.
Yeah, it's true. Also misogynist, because the one fantasy culture that has women in charge is like the most evil, backstabbing bullshit culture of the world, the Drow.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. No, thanks for that. Friggin' wasn't it R.A. Salvatore who came up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, R.A.
Although dark elves come also from Nordic mythology, but yeah, R.A. Salvatore fleshed them out a lot. So that kind of is the heat of many of our arguments as high schoolers, because I loved elves. I read the complete book of elves, and instead of saying like, they're just good at everything, that's stupid, I was like, they're good at everything, that's awesome. I freaking love elves.
Yeah.
So I was on board. Like, most of my characters have been elves. Played a half elf once, but that was your fault.
Yeah, you're welcome. I made you do it.
But I was always because being the 120-pound kid in high school, there's something appealing about like a race of people who's really slim but super graceful, so it doesn't matter, they just don't get hit. That's how they fight.
Yeah, it makes sense. Plus, they're awesome at everything,
using rapiers and bows and spears and such. But yeah, we did have a lot of discussions about this, and it made me think on a game balance issue. Well, first of all, let's talk about just the elves being better than everything, and are they therefore kind of a bullshit race? What's your take on that now, like 20 years down the line from the last time we had this argument?
I think everybody's starting to realize that. And what I did in my campaign world to fuck with this is I was like, fine, you know what? Fine, we can have these elves that are better than everyone, and they're called light elves, right? They're exactly the Tolkien idea, of like think of like Galadriel or something.
Yeah.
This idea of this, almost hovering, super magical, favorite of the gods, all that bullshit, right? But then we're also going to have real elves, and so I call them city elves or low elves or common elves, and those are the ones that like everyone typically plays in D&D. Where they're just out, they're normal, but they're not. They still feel that they're above other people, but then they get shit on too by light elves. They understand that they're not as awesome as they think they are. And then I did the wood elves too, because I like wood elves. That's a cool flavor to me, because it really gets into that whole them being into nature. So I fractured them into 3 different groups. One being the bullshit race that I hate, but it was important for my world. And then the other one was you take them down a notch. Races. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a pretty common solution now, especially the fracturing of elves into saying, like, oh, we're good at everything. It's like, oh, no, you're good at magic, you're good at nature. At least we have that divide now for most ways games handle elves. In fact, that's one of the inherent difficulties with elves, because if you're reading, like, if you're playing a J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, the role-playing game, right? And you're playing an elf, like, you're going to be overpowered. There's just no way to balance that in that world, right? They're right. Almost godlike in their abilities, some of them. And you see that in The Lord of the Rings, even the movies where they toned them down a little bit. It was still like Gimli's chopping people, Aragorn's chopping people, and then Legolas surfs in on a shield and shoots 8 orcs with a bow, or just unworldly good at killing orcs.
Yeah,
like to the point where it's almost comical.
The kind of it just bugs me. I don't think that's interesting, and if it is, it's certainly. I mean, you can't play those characters in a game, right?
Yeah, and that's the problem that we have, because games want to have elves in them, like Skyrim, World of Warcraft. Every game, right, is going to have some kind of elven race if it's a fantasy game. Or sometimes they'll make up a new race that you're like, oh, these are the elves for this world, because they're essentially they fill that placeholder. They're very advanced. They're an ancient civilization. They're really like heads and shoulders above the humans, but they're aloof.
Yeah, I think that I do think that they're a bullshit race, because what you have to do is you have to make, like, think about dwarves. That's an interesting race to me. They're, they're stubborn and always likable, but when you do meet them, when you do get on their good side, they're really loyal, which so they're kind of xenophobic, they're kind of set in their ways. Everybody has relatives like that. You can kind of be like, oh, I got it, yeah, I know this. Or everybody has like a lovable friend that's that way, for example. But and same thing with like with half elf, or I'm sorry, halflings, or people from or what do they call it? The Shire halfling. They're called halflings. Yeah. Or hobbits, yeah. Same thing with hobbits. Like that's a real person. Like you could that's a real person with real flaws. Like but lovable. Yeah, but elves are just, I don't know anyone like an elf unless you're just talking about like someone who's perfect. I don't. To me, I'm like, that's not very interesting. You literally just took all the knobs, see, like like beauty and reclusivity or whatever, and just turned them all up. You're just like, yeah, sure, yeah. Let's go all the way up on all those. They're good. They're beautiful. They're effective. They're the most important species. They live the longest. They do. They make the most stuff. I don't find that that's. I think it's lazy. And so Tolkien shit on C.S. Lewis for Santa Claus. I would shit on him for elves. It's I mean, I guess the concept kind of makes sense. In his world, it's fine to have someone that's super overpowered to contrast maybe humanity, but they could have made him more interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll give Tolkien a pass on the elves because he's not designing a game where everything needs to be balanced. I think there is an interesting story place for having a incredibly powerful but diminishing race, like a culture that's has all those advantages and yet is still being slowly phased out and like diminishing, and the humans are kind of replacing them. Like that's an interesting juxtaposition. There's a tension there between like, well, why are the elves diminishing? What, they've got every advantage. What's happening there? Same thing with like, why is America the one country that doesn't have like healthcare and it's a first world country, right? Like it's just something is going on that's interesting to explore there in a story. But the problem comes when D&D comes out, which is largely based on Tolkien. And the problem now is, how are we going to make elves playable race without destroying the balance? And there's been a lot of like when they first came out, elf was a class in like original D&D. And so that was the balance. You weren't like an elven fire, an elven wizard. You were just an elf, and everything being an elf entails. That's your character now. Enjoy. But slowly they became more like other races, but just better. Like, oh, you're this, and you're immune to this, and you're immune to that, and you get +1 with bows and +1 with swords. And then it got to the point where everybody was playing an elf, and that kind of goes against the setting you're trying to establish in a fantasy realm. Like, you want humans to be the most prolific species in most settings, right? Like, that's just a human trope where we're the plucky underdogs who breed like rabbits and kind of spread everywhere.
Right.
Even when our planet gets destroyed in sci-fi, there's always humans just floating around in space doing stuff.
Yeah, the dominable human spirit, That's
yeah.
the idea.
But if everyone's playing elves, like you're not going to feel like humans are the majority anymore. So D&D kind of went the other direction. They made humans very mechanically awesome. Like they got bonus feat, bonus skills. Like they made them so if you were min-maxing a character and wanted to make the best character, human was always a good choice. Mm-hmm. And then they took elves and they toned them down. So like the lore was still that they were, beautiful and graceful and all that, but there was no difference between an elven archer and a human archer. Like they both were equally as good at using a bow. So they kind of like turned down the knobs a little bit. So people just didn't play elves as often anymore. They became rare, although they were no longer mechanically the powerful race that you were used to them being.
Yeah, you played elf if it was an interesting character you wanted to make, rather than just everybody being elves.
Right, so I played like a 3rd edition elf, but it wasn't like I wasn't getting anything out of that except for you're immune to charm spells because those happen all the time, right?
And you only have to you don't sleep. You can just meditate 4 hours.
Yeah, so you got a cool flavor, some flavor things, but you weren't like just mechanically the monster that a Tolkien elf would be.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. Yeah, I don't understand why they all have to be beautiful. Like. That's something that definitely used to happen in Tolkien's, but that's still here, that they're all beautiful. Like, I like the idea of how Dragon Age treats elves, where they end up being enslaved, but look at one of the main characters, Solus. He's an elven mage, and he's not pretty to look at, and in fact, he has a bald head, so it's like, he shaved his head. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they're playing up, which I think. Tolkien did too. It's just it kind of got lost when they became movies, but playing up the idea that instead of being everyone's a supermodel. Everybody has this kind of otherworldly beauty that, yes, Solus has symmetrical features, but he's vaguely off-putting. There's something weird about him. You don't feel attracted to him so much as you can appreciate that he does have like a chiseled jaw and like high cheekbones and everything, but you're not like, oh, that's a sexy man. You're just like, oh, there's something weird about that guy.
Uh-huh.
Which is like that other, like Galadriel was described that way, just sort of bright and terrible, like, yes, beautiful sometimes, but also terrible, also strange and weird and bizarre.
Yeah, like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, just vaguely off-putting, like Hillary Clinton.
No.
Which I like that direction of elves. I like it when they're not like Liv Tyler elves, where it's like Arwen, she's Liv Tyler, but with pointy ears. Like, I like them to be kind of weird, slightly off-putting. Like maybe the eyes are too big, or maybe the proportions of the face are just slightly strange from what we're used to. You know, that uncanny valley effect where things the closer it gets to human, but then there's something a little bit off that we can't quite register consciously, but it makes us feel uncomfortable. Like, that's how elven beauty, I think, would be cool, just playing up, because again, I think there's an interesting place for elves in fantasy if we play up their otherness and their feyness. Like, they should feel like they don't belong in this world.
Yeah, I guess there's an interesting spot, so I retract that statement. But on the other hand, I just feel that he could have made them more interesting. Like, I think dwarves are interesting. I think hobbits are interesting. I think even the
they're interesting because they're relatable, right? Because you know people like them.
Well, but what about the goblins and the Uruk-hai? I think they're interesting. You know, fallen elves. That's cool. And then is it relatable? No, I don't feel that way. But I just think it's a cool concept. I think Ints are cool. That's a cool idea. But I just don't. Elves just seem literally like he was just like, I don't know, I'll make it perfect. I guess if that's kind of your, I don't know. He did that again though with the Dunedain or the First Men or whatever. So Tolkien experts are gonna shit all over me, but my understanding is that they were better. Yeah, Old Earth, or I can't remember what they were called. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, it does. It's a cool story flavor. I just don't think they should be a playable race in any Tolkien idea.
Yeah. What do you think about the way the Warcraft story handles elves? Where that, yes, they were cool, but they got pretty much wrecked super hard, and now they're just addicts trying to like do whatever it takes to survive, and they're on the verge of extinction.
Like, do you mean Eldar or
like Prince Kael'thas?
With Kael'thas?
Like the Blood Elves kind of story.
Oh, Warcraft.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said Warhammer. Maybe you didn't. Maybe I was just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool, I guess. I like that. I like anything interesting, an interesting storyline like that.
I'm just trying to define interesting for you because it's a broad term. So what makes it interesting is the idea that there's some sort of terrible thing that happens to them, or there's some sort of interesting calamity.
So what makes a Wonder Woman? Let's say a Wonder Woman, an idea of like 1950s Wonder Woman film came out, and then or a TV show, and then you made a Jessica Jones TV show. Jessica Jones is interesting. Wonder Woman is not, because she has no flaws. So same thing with Jessica Jones. It's same thing. So Warhammer 40K does Eldar, which are just space elves basically, and they're almost always opposed to humanity. There's an antagonistic relationship there, and they're very weird, and they have warp tech. They understand they can use warp, even within like themselves, so they can like teleport places and things.
They're kind of like the Protoss, basically, flavor-wise.
Yeah, but not like, see, even Protoss is like Tolkien space elves. They're just better at everything, and instead these guys they make cool shit, but they're so. You never know what an Eldar is going to do, and if they come to a meeting, let's say you just had a meeting amongst everyone, you're going to get the chaos people who are just warp touched basically, and they're fucked. You know how they're going to act, and then the humans, they're going to kind of act in their own best interest, and they're going to try to reason things out. But then Eldar, you just don't know, and they use double speak. They'll say things different ways, and then they'll make a deal and they break it immediately, or they'll just show up and shit on everyone and leave, and you're like, why would they even do that? You're just constantly wondering, what is it they even want? Like, how do you, because they're so far.
And that goes that's the kind of elves I think are interesting to me, because that goes back to the Oberon Titania, where they're just so other that you can't understand their thought process anymore, which is how a race that lives for like 1,000 years, that's how I would imagine they would start thinking differently when you have that kind of strange perspective that would look insane to us. Like what I do every day looks insane to my cat, who lives for about 9 years, because it doesn't have that big picture view of like, oh, there's bills that have to be paid and all that stuff. And I think that the longer your lifespan, that it's going to warp your perspective into something that's incomprehensible to something shorter lived. And that's, I think, the interesting direction for Elves is like the Eldar, where you're just like, why would they do that? What was the point of that?
Yeah, exactly. I like it. I think it's great. Like a technologically superior race who is also very otherworldly. Yeah, and more importantly, I love. That's why I like the Fae in the fourth edition. I played them this way in my campaign world, where you just can never guess what they're gonna do. You're just constantly going, "What the fuck?" Like, why would you do that? Like, 1 second you're helping us, but the whole time you get an uneasy alliance because you're like, I don't know what they're getting out of this. This seems weird. It'd be like if you were outside and you were picking up dog shit in someone's yard, and someone walked up and they're like, "Hey, yeah, why don't you go inside and I'll just do this for you?" And you're like, "I've never met you. Why would you want to pick up dog shit in my yard? That's a weird, And they're like, "Just do it. I'll come in later and I'll cook for you, and then maybe give you a massage or something." And you're like, "What? What the fuck is going on?" Like that's what you should be doing when you interact, I think, and for an interesting like Fae or interesting space elves or whatever. I just like that idea where you're just constantly trying to figure out, like, maybe their whole culture is different, so that's how they do things. Like, imagine taking someone from the Game of Thrones, from the Red Keep, and then putting them up in the north. They're so drastically different that they would constantly be wondering why the other person's doing what they're doing, or just boggled by why someone would do that, like honor, in the north, that kind of thing.
One thing that I like that fourth edition did, and that a lot of people do now, is, well, I'll give you the pros and cons. Sub races, right? So elves, you've got your wood elves, high elves, sea elves, wind elves, rock elves, drow elves, whatever kind of elves, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. I don't like that elves are so genetically diverse that they just have adapted and mutated to be in every scenario. Like, oh, these are the winged elves, and these are the drow, and these are this kind of elf, and that kind of elf, and that kind of elf. Like, there's sea elves that can turn to dolphins in Dragonlance. Remember those? The Kaganesti?
Yeah.
Or whatever they were called. Like, that, I don't like. I don't like the idea that elves are just, I don't know what about them. They're like the Eevees of the fantasy world, that they just mutate super easily and adapt. But I do like the idea, and a lot of people go the other direction with this, that I also don't like, is you'll have a fantasy world, and it's like, all right, we have the Westeros kind of world, and we have the sand kind of world, and the Khaleesi world, and there's all these kingdoms, right, of humans, and the culture's way different for each kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And then elves is just like, and then there's the elves. They have elf culture, and it's just like they all have the same hat on. They're all the same, basically.
Yeah.
So you can go too far the other way and just make elves too elf. Like, just everywhere you meet an elf, oh, that's an elf. I know exactly what that elf's all about.
Yeah, see, that's why I like Dragon Age so much. You play the game and you meet two different elves, and they're very different people. They don't even get along.
Right. And it's not just their personality isn't just elf. It's So I do like it when they make different cultures. So, for example, the wood elves versus the high elves. I think that's an interesting divide in fourth edition. Yeah. The Eladrin and the wood elves, and they've actually kind of physically changed because the Eladrin are on the Feywild more. But it's not so different that, like, oh, and they're blue skin and they can turn to dolphins. Like, it's not that crazy of a difference.
Yeah.
And, like, if you looked at a wood elf, you wouldn't be able to know if it was a high elf or a wood elf just by looking at him, unless he was wearing, like, some of his traditional clothing or something, or had marks on his face. There would be cultural indicators. So I like it when game worlds will develop a culture for different elven places, but without being like, these are the elves that are super good at living in lava. They're lava elves. They can turn to fire.
Yeah. And I like whenever a good DM or a good writer makes them different. Like, you meet, like, look at Dragon Age, the dwarf that you meet, Varric. He's a swashbuckler, basically.
Yeah, he's super refined. He's like a bard more than anything else.
And yes, most of the dwarves you meet, or many of the dwarves you meet, are just straight up dwarves. But you've got interesting backdrops, so I think it's cool. Or you've got a backdrop, but you have an interesting person there too. So, and
it's hard for a player who wants to play an elf. There's a tension there because it's really easy to just rely on elven stereotypes for your character. Like, oh yeah, I'm snooty and I'm haughty and I'm very into life. All the things that elves are supposed to be known for when you read the description of them as a race, right? So that's one temptation. But what I find to be the more common way people play elves is they're humans with pointy ears.
Mm-hmm.
And the way people write elves sometimes too. Oh, it's a human with pointy ears. Like, they have no different way of acting or thinking. Like, you should have sort of an alien mindset if you're going to be playing a non-human, right? Whether it's a dwarf or a hobbit or Like if you're playing a hobbit and somebody suggests let's go on an adventure, and your first reaction is like, awesome, I want to go get some loot, then you're playing a human with hairy feet. You're not playing a hobbit. You should at least have the inclination of, but it's comfortable here by the fire, let's smoke a pipe, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there could be OOC talk too. Like, if your character, if you're playing like and this is RPGs, but if you're playing like a character and you're like, oh man, my guy's afraid of cities, can you guys talk him into it or something like that? You can
Right.
have, and then that'll lead to interesting discussions. Because then they'll be like, oh yeah, would my character even care? No, and so they may just leave you outside, and then you're like, oh, that's cool. There's a new dynamic that just formed intrinsically because you are playing, what the actual character.
Right. It's not you with pointy ears. You're actually in a different mindset.
Exactly. Yeah. And you may do self-harming things just like anybody does, and
Right.
your friends will try to talk you out of it. But
Or you might do something that really screws over yourself or the group in the short term because you're looking at how these actions will affect things 700 years later, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, we got to do this. And you're like, what the hell? Why would you do that? And you're like, it's going to make sense in a few hundred years. Just wait. Like, we're not going to be alive then, Dick. Like that's where the interesting tensions can happen, just from those two perspectives coming into conflict.
yeah, it's interesting because like with us as humans, I don't go, hey, it'd be really nice to have a tree house in my yard. I'm gonna go plant a tree because I'm probably not gonna be around long enough to get some massive tree and then build a house in it. But they would. They just be like, we should make a forest here, and then they just do. Because
that would be a cool like role play moment if like everyone's, because you don't sleep, right? So everyone's asleep, and then they wake up and they see you just like walking around with these acorns, and you're just planting them every so often, and they're like, "What are you doing?" It's planting a grove. Why? I thought it'd be a nice place to have a picnic.
Yeah.
What do you mean have a picnic? It's gonna take 100 years for that grove to come into fruition. He's like, yes, and in 100 years I would enjoy a picnic here. I don't see why is this hard to understand?
Yeah, and then they're like, well, how do you know where your life will be then? You're like, oh, at some point in my life, I'll probably be back here. I mean, don't you? You're going to see the world a few different times, and you're like, oh, man, we don't even see the whole world. Fuck. Like, yeah, those are interesting moments.
And I think that's what Elves done right can add to a game or a story, is if you actually remember that they're not humans. But I think 90% of people who have ever seen play Elves, and I've done it too, you just end up playing them as humans, basically, with pointy ears. Like Gavilan Trakand, except that he's an elf, you wouldn't know because he's basically just a swashbuckling human.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. Yeah, and then somebody asked, or the listener also asked about the psychology of certain things. But I think it's very telling about what they manipulated for elves, what they changed about them, right? They didn't give them like a droopy back, right? Obviously, you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want to give them misshapen eyes, for example.
Right, or like a third eye on their forehead or something.
Exactly, something disquieting. Instead, they mess with things that we don't have that much. Okay, so there's something called they call it neurolinguistics when I was in counterintelligence, but in psychology, it's just like micro transactions basically you have whenever you're communicating with someone. And I talk about these whenever I give this effective communication class to businesses sometimes. But one of them I would give is I always gave this example. I was like, you want to see something crazy? Watch, I'm going to stand a certain way, okay? And then I would like everyone to just shut your eyes. Would you be willing to do that? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So I stand a certain way, however it is. I put my leg out a little bit, but it's noticeably different than just standing. So maybe I put my leg way out to the side, and then one hand up, right? And then I go, okay, now close your eyes, please. And then they do. And then I undo it. I move just the tiniest bit. And then I go, will you please open your eyes again? And they do. And I go, okay, am I in the same place? And people are like, yeah. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Now watch this. Watch my face now. Everybody look, please. And then I just have a regular face. And then I go, all right, now close your eyes. And they close their eyes. And I just move my eyes just a little like this. Listeners can't hear it, but I'm taking my brow and moving it just a millimeter down.
Half a centimeter down.
Yeah. And then I'm like, open your eyes, please. And they do. And I go, what's different about or is my face different? And they're like, yeah, you look like a little angry right now or a little concentrated. And I was like, exactly. It's funny that we're very sensitive to parts of our face that are different, like facial features. We've measured this, but people can notice the tiniest difference. Like people like go, oh, you got a kind of the starting of a smile there, and you're like, wow, that's incredible. If you move your finger a little, they're not like, you're about to ball your fist up and punch me. We don't do that.
It's almost like we evolved to be hypersensitive to communication that's nonverbal and expressed on our face.
Exactly, right. And so the interesting thing here is they didn't mess with anything that we would notice it's not like their mouths are inordinately large or something like that.
Right.
It's their ears and then their height and their weight, right? And then of course all of that is the ears is benign, right? It's like if you said somebody had extra long, well, fingers is a little different, but maybe fingers too, or arms. Your arms are a little longer. We'd see that as a little different, but it wouldn't be off-putting. It would just be different. It'd be weird. So same thing with the ears. I think it's like, oh, well, their ears are a little different.
You'll notice there's a huge spectrum of pointiness too. Like you've got the Record of Lodoss War Deedlit kind of ears that go a mile high, or World of Warcraft elves have these huge ears, and then you go all the way down to like Vulcan or just kind of standard pointy ears, small ones.
Yeah, like Santa elf ears.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, these are things that we could predict you're going to do. If you want to make someone different, like a little different, but you don't want to mess with their beauty or how awesome they look, or if they're like relatable, which I think would be weird too, because I think in 3rd edition D&D, for example, they made their eyes a little more almondy. Remember the artwork?
Yeah.
They explicitly said it in the book too. And they kept that with Eladrin in the next one. They took away their pupils, which I think is an awesome, also a cool idea.
Yeah, kind of a vaguely off-putting but not physically unattractive feature.
Yeah, exactly. And almond-shaped eyes is something that's actually a compliment that a lot of people use. So I'm like, okay, well, they overdid it with the compliment, fine. But yeah, so I think the things that they manipulated they were unintentional. I'm sure he didn't really think it through this way, but just like anything else you do, the behavior made sense in the end if you analyze it. So that's the only thing I think is interesting about from a psychological point of view, I guess. That, and then like you said, perspective taking. Like us is now we're teleological beings. We think of in the future, right? That's how we think, and so we set ourselves up for goals, to happen, or many of us do. And it would be very different if the world would seem smaller, right? Probably. Because right now the world seems vast to me, because I'm like, I'll never see that whole world. To get somewhere, gosh, that would take days, and days means something to me because it's a ratio of how much time's currency, right? How much currency I can spend to get, like if someone said, will you walk to Georgia? I'll be like, no, why would I walk to Georgia? That'd take weeks. And then if the person said so, that would be someone who lives a long time, right? Like time, the currency is just, it's like inflation, right? In money, in economy. Ours is inflated. No, theirs is inflated, so it's worth less. Ours is in a tight economy, so it's worth a lot more. So I think things like that would be interesting. They would be like, let's sleep today, and you're like, oh, but we got stuff we want to do, man. We want to do this, and it's like, could wait, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, those tensions of a time is money is a uniquely human idiom, right? They wouldn't have an equivalent in Elvish for that.
Right.
They'd probably have a pneumatic expression saying like, time is unlimited, so do whatever the hell you want, right? It'll be like, time is like the sun. It'll always be there. And you're like, wait, what? And that's like what their expression is. And it means the exact opposite of time is money. It's like, just do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think too, you'd get a lot of like the perspective of like older people, just tolerance. So I actually think them being intolerant is silly, because older people, as you grow up, you start to become more tolerant, right? You're just like,
do you? Because the most racist people I know are old.
Well, I think that's a generational thing. I mean, our generation will be more tolerant.
They were bigger assholes when they were 20, is what you're saying?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but it's just that people. Okay, so they say youthful passion, right? And that's because you feel like you can change the world, right? You're taking these big, bold steps. You're doing these things. You don't have a lot to lose, because you don't have a lot invested, and you also have a lot of time to see these things work out, right? Old people. Invariably they want stability, right? Is one of the things they want. Another thing is they become just, like they pass up arguments, it gives you the perspective of, a marathon rather than a sprint, right? When you're young, everything's a sprint and every opportunity is to be seized. But when you're older, it's like, at least I'm getting this way. And I notice my grandparents and people like that are that way.
But you think part of the reason that old humans are that way is because they know there's not much time left and they don't want to waste it on bullshit?
Maybe, but I think there's
mortality comes into play, because that wouldn't happen for elves.
Well, but also learning history. I mean, a lot of that, because some of that, but they're also learning history, because as you go on, you start to, things that make sense in the short term don't make sense in the long term. And older people start to get that. They usually get some perspective. Like they like they say, well, I've had these fights before, and they go round and round and nothing ever happens, right? Like, so politics, sometimes a lot of older people are like, oh, don't argue about this thing, just let it go. It's not gonna, but a younger person might jump on that because they feel slighted. So I wonder if that, I think it's learning history of longer, so we call them contingencies. So like you have a behavior and a consequent, and then a contingency is the link between those two. But you can have those really drawn out. So like, for example, working out, the contingency between working out and its eventual consequence has a really long or it's not duration, magnitude, or no, blah. Latency. Sorry, latency means how long the time in between the behavior is and the actual consequence. And you become more cognizant, I think, of those. So you start planning for the long term, basically, like retirement spending or retirement, putting money into retirement, for example. That would be a good example of a long latency reinforcer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of like what we were talking about. The languages that don't have a future tense they plan for the future differently because they don't separate the future and the present as much. Yeah. So we can see how our behaviors are kind of affected by how we think about what's to come.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think they would just have. Oh, that's a perfect example of a long latency reinforcer is planning that grove. You've got something that's going to pay off way down the line, and so humans were like, well, we wouldn't even be exposed to that reinforcer. But let's say something like that you would see in your lifetime, like how about growing a tree? Yeah, or seeing a tree and saying, I'm going to make a boat out of that tree, but waiting until it's in its prime, until you're like, oh, in about 30 years, it'll be stronger wood. And so they might be more likely to do that kind of thing. Whereas us, we're like, well, man, I'll be here in 30 years, but damn, that's a long time to wait to have a boat. You know what I mean? So they can monopolize on longer latency reinforcers like that.
What would be cool too, from a psychology perspective, is everything we know about human behavior, behaviorism, cognitive behavioral therapy, all that stuff that we have science and studies and experiments, we'd have to throw that out the window if you were a psychologist among the elves, because those same variant rewards and like all the stuff we're talking about with variable training, like the stuff pigeons do and humans do, like it might not actually work on elves. You'd have to sort of rewrite the book on psychology for influencing elf behavior.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see what moves over there and what doesn't.
Yeah,
like surely things like mouth-watering would, right? But then what about things like values training? Where you get someone to start thinking in the future. The long-term consequences. We have science behind that to know how best to maximize the chance that the patient or the client will start thinking that way. But
so if you were doing like a steampunk or like a cyberpunk fantasy world, like a Shadowrun kind of game, right?
Yeah.
And there's elves now. Like you would expect to see in a well-written world, like psychologists that specialize in elven psychology or psychologists that specialize in dwarves, because it wouldn't, like the human psychology wouldn't always work on other races.
That would be cool. What if you had like a elven cleric and he kept trying to give like certain like these little maxims?
Yeah, these little life lessons.
Yeah,
completely lost on the rest of the party.
Yeah, or it's just completely like just does not. Yeah, because you say something like, "Hey," or like you lose a kid and you go, "Hey, you'll have thousands more. It's fine." In your lifetime, and you're like, no, we just get like 6, you dick. And he's like, oh, yeah, that would suck. Yeah, like he just doesn't get your perspective, but he's trying to. That would be hilarious.
That'd be a fun character to play.
Why don't people play dumb elves? That's another thing. They always make them more intelligent. And I'm like, they don't have to be. You could be. Yeah. There are dumb elves. There's going to be dumb elves. Vote for Trump.
I think a lot of it is the same reason it's hard to play a droid, right? Like in a Star Wars game, is you just have to see the world through a lens that we're not used to using, and so it's hard to role play outside of that. Like if you're playing an HK assassin droid, your whole world is zeros and ones. That's all it is. We see when we picture how a droid sees the world, we picture just maybe what we're looking at, but with a HUD that like shows like percentages and stuff, like Terminator vision. But that's not how a Terminator would see the world. That's geared towards humans because we interpret data through visual senses. A droid wouldn't need those zeros and ones translated into a picture and then process it that way. He would just have the zeros and ones and he'd be keeping track of what they all represent because he's a computer. So it's like a whole different paradigm.
But would they? I mean, because we're the same thing with zeros and ones. Either you have a neuron firing or you don't.
Right. But we have
sensation. We organize it in our brain into a picture, but it's not.
But why would a computer do that?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not.
Because you wouldn't need a visual representation to track something. You would just be like if a bullet was coming at you, you would just have like some zeros and ones that represent the bullet, and then like some data that represents how fast it's coming at you and what angle it's at. But you wouldn't necessarily need to translate that into a picture to dodge it. You would just
Huh.
0 and 1 your way out of it. It would just all be math, basically.
Thinking about that. Yeah, the only counter argument I could think of is maybe it's more useful or faster to crunch data that way. Maybe.
But I think that would be slower because you're putting an extra step in. You're putting like that's why graphics cards have to get stronger and stronger, is because you're getting better and better graphics. Like if we didn't need, like, unless it makes it easier for the computer to process it by seeing a bullet coming at you, like the representation, but why would it?
Well, no, I mean, so like if you have a bunch of data, right? This happens like if you're coding for a web page, you have like a whole set of behaviors, and then you just put those into a script. If I remember, that's what it's called, and then you can import that script just by writing in the code. You say, oh, this is that placeholder thing, and so by coming up with a superordinate placeholder, it actually saves time and crunching time basically by saying, hey, every time I say CS, for example, you're going to think of this. And so you do end up making it shorter sometimes by adding more code. So it's possible that would happen. Like if you said, okay, whenever you see blue things, blue is this subset of zeros and ones, it's more likely to be an appetitive thing, something you move towards. That's why we like blue and green so much, humans, because it's things we like. There's a greater chance that it's going to be an appetitive, a worthwhile thing for our time, basically.
I'm picturing like when you're programming a web page, right? And most of us will click on there's a thing where you just type it out and you can see the font sizes and everything. Few people actually program the page in the actual code, like the HTML, like colon, bold, whatever, like all that stuff. But a computer wouldn't need the nice presentation. They would just be writing in the code all the time, right? If you were a computer blogger, like let's say you were just a machine that was blogging.
Well, maybe. I mean, but think of this. All the things. If you've ever played a first-person shooter, which I think all of us have, there are a lot of things we do automatically. Like whenever I start doing something, like pieing off a corner, I don't think about it. It's because I have a subset of stimuli that has already been thought, and I've automated that by now. Automating means I don't have to process it again. It's just like a little placeholder, and I use that. So maybe something visual would be better because of the fact that you can make those decisions without ever having to consider why you're doing them. Maybe. I don't know. We need a coder.
Yeah, it's hard to put yourself in because again, we've evolved to be reliant on vision, so it's become our shorthand, right? If you didn't evolve relying on vision, you wouldn't, unless you were trying to program it from a human perspective, which is what we do. We anthropomorphize everything. We just imagine everything is seeing the world the way we see it. But I don't know. It's interesting to think, and we're a little off topic, but going to elves, like it might be as different as how I imagine a droid thinks for an elf, because they're just a different system of evolution or whatever created them.
And it would be interesting to see what a droid. Well, okay, we are a little off topic, but what they would delete. Like in our mind, we forget things that we don't use because that's our metric.
Right.
Or that's our usefulness. Our system is based on usefulness. Like, is that memory useful? I don't know. How many times have you referenced it since then? And if you haven't referenced it as much, you're more likely to forget that memory. But the more you reference it,
the memory every time we reference it, whereas a computer doesn't.
Yeah. So it would have. I know that would be annoying as shit, wouldn't it? It'd be telling you exactly what you said. You're like, you said this, and you're like, no, I remember feeling this way, and this is kind of what I said. And
then
like,
they just play it back, the audio file that they were.
And you're like, God damn it, fine. I'm inconsistent sometimes. It's true because I'm a human. It's like inefficient, and you're like, fuck you.
Right. So if you're playing an HK droid, you'd have to see the world, even if you don't actually see it as zeros and ones, because who knows, but you would process it that way, right? Like you would be like, after every battle, you'd be giving a thing like, I made 72.35% of my shots that I took, and if we bought this new scope at the item shop, it would raise that percentage to 75.6 based on projected results. And they're like, oh, just tell me you want a new gun, asshole. You don't have to do the math every time. Like, I'm using
what
that
is want?
What is want, exactly. What is love? But those kind of like tropey droid things that you have to keep in mind. Like if you're playing an elf and you want to be interesting, it's the same kind of thing. You have to kind of take yourself out of that human perspective and say, okay, well, what is an elf value? How does the elf see the world? How does my longevity play into this decision? And I think you can have some really interesting role-playing experiences or character developmental things in the story that way. Like Solus is an interesting character in Dragon Age because he sees the world so differently, and that's not just because he's an elf. There's other reasons that we find out later that I won't go into because of spoilers, but like it's that kind of otherworldliness that comes from having a different perspective that makes them interesting.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is don't with elves, don't just, because this is my temptation with you too, is whenever you'd say something like, oh yes, sleep, interesting, yeah, I forgot about that, because you say something like, we can make it there in the day, and I'm like, no, we have to go, we have to set up camp, and then you're like, oh right, because sleeping. And in my head, me as a person, as the PC, I'm like, oh fuck you, David. But I was like, no. It's about my character and how he'd think of that, and then play it out. Because then I would be like, oh, look at you. Why do you always look down on us? And then you're like, I don't look down on you. I just see as you different. And I'm like, different but less. And then you're like,
yeah,
oh,
and that's an interesting moment of RP.
Yeah. So like, it's interesting. I think it's fun. It's play it through. Don't just go off on, like I said. I have a distaste for elves in general, but not really. I don't. But I guess as a character, I'm always like, oh, here's this again. They don't have to eat or whatever. But play it out.
It's because a lot of times elves just don't get played out to where they're interesting. It's just like, oh, you want to be the best archer, right?
Right.
So you're going to be an elf or whatever. But like that brings me to video games. I tend to like to play elves on video games for different reasons. I like the elves on video games because my play style, I tend to enjoy the people who don't rely on hit points, like the non-tanky kind of characters. So if it's quick and a lot of dodge play or a lot of range attacks or a lot of positioning, like skirmish style, that's what I enjoy playing. I don't enjoy being the slow-moving but strong character. And typically that's what elves get put into in the games. Is like, oh, you want to be the fast character? That's the elf.
Mm-hmm. Which I think it would be cool to break that too, like make an elven paladin who just works out all the time. Because there's people who works. Yeah, there's women weightlifters. They're working against their own, biology that doesn't.
Joanna is a tank, and she's a female, like cavalier.
Yeah, I think that's cool. But, damn, I forgot what I was gonna say. Starting to get into that. But anyway, so I think you can play elves interestingly, and if you do, allow your character to see those things as weird too. Like if you're responding to an elf, allow that to be. If you're frustrated with elves, your dude probably is too. He may hold weird beliefs. So maybe say something like, "Oh, you guys don't have to sleep," and you're like, "Actually, we have to meditate for 4 hours." And be like, "Whoa, really?" And especially if you're a scholar, you're like, "Oh, interesting. What do you do?" But if you're just a warrior, you're like, "Must be nice," or whatever.
Right, like look through it like for both ways, right?
Right.
And if you're an elf that's really in tune with the natural world, maybe you see the forest differently. Maybe you're not noticing. Maybe you're noticing other things than what everyone else is noticing. Like everyone else is hearing the birds chirping, and you're thinking like, oh yes, it's a hot season this year, and the birds are concerned about being able to find water. And they're like, wait, how'd you get that from the chirping? Like it's in the song. You have to listen for it. And they're like, wait, what does that mean? It sounds different. Can you speak bird? What does that mean? And you're just like. Just cool things like that, little details that might not come to mind. Like you have to take yourself out of like your day. It's a harder role playing challenge, I think, because playing a human, even a different human, like a female human or a human from another culture, like it's hard to do because it's a different mindset, but it's doable. But when you're playing a different race, like a dwarf or an elf, like there's an extra step of challenge. I think that's what appeals to me for the role playing aspect is just taking myself one step further out of my shoes and being like, remember when we were playing that Lord of the Rings game and I was the dwarf and I was like, all right, how would a dwarf see this scenario right now? And I'm like, oh man, he's probably like really, because the dwarves are on decline too, right? They're almost an endangered species at this point. So he's going to be really looking for reasons why dwarves are awesome because he's trying to reassure himself of his spot in the world. So, he wants to rename the tower like the City of the Dwarves or something.
Yeah, and that's, I think it's the devil's in the details. That's the coolest part, because like whenever little things like that come up, like for example, if you're partying with an elf and then you're in the city to go turn in a quest or whatever, and they say, oh, let's hurry up and get back home, and you're like, you're going home? I thought you're being on a mission for a while, and you're like, oh no, anywhere out there is home to me, right? Like I don't have a place I just live. You guys do, and and you're like, yeah, what the hell? Where do you go? And you're like, anywhere, you're like, if there's a tree or somewhere to lay down, that's where I live.
Or buying an adventures pack and you're taking the backpack out and they're like, dude, you can keep this. And they're like, you don't want the backpack? It's free. It comes with the adventures kit. And you're like, you roll it out, right? And you sleep on it. And like, yeah, it's like, it's just, I don't need it.
The bedroll,
like, that's weird. You want to sleep on the ground? And you're like, yes, of course. That's my mother or whatever. That's the
or candles. Like you'd be like, candle. What the hell am I gonna do? Like, why would I do that? And then you're like, well, it's to see. And you're like, everything's flammable. I would just make a small fire or whatever, or a torch, or however it is.
Or I can see in the dark. You can't. That's weird.
Yeah. So stuff like that I think is what makes things cool. Those little details more than it is the grand gestures like aloofness or being snooty.
Right. That's easy to do. It's like it's an easy shortcut for like, I'm playing an elf. I'm a dick. I treat other races like garbage. And what makes more sense as a psychologist, an entire race that treats other races like garbage, or an entire race that accidentally treats other races like garbage because they can't put themselves in their shoes?
Yeah, exactly. Definitely the second one.
Right.
I feel like that's rhetorical, but I answered anyway.
And as well you did.
But yeah, then there was one last part that he asked about, which I thought was interesting. The listener said, why is it that some people use elves more? It was about Japanese culture and little girls get owned or something when they have elf ears. You remember?
Why does adding pointy ears to a character race change our perspective? In like anime, why is it more acceptable to mistreat or have relations with little girl creatures when they're pointy-eared aliens? Granted, Japanese cultural acceptance differs greatly from U.S. So yeah, why are we okay with mistreating, like doing? Okay, so this is kind of a specific genre thing, but in anime, oftentimes there's a little girl trope, like a little girl character who's of age but looks like a small child.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to have pointy ears if it's like a fantasy or a space sci-fi kind of thing. And why are we okay seeing them get abused or beaten or raped or whatever? We're not okay with it, but we're more okay with it than seeing it happen to a human child.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing. I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing because this is something that's tied to innocence, right? It's not like a beard. Beard is tied to like manliness, and there's an idea. There's a meme right now that says if you look like this, and the guy with a beard, it says, "You can't change a tire. Get the fuck out of here," right? It's because that's tied to like self-reliance, to being rugged
individualism.
Yeah, and it's the same thing of like why doesn't the president of the United States wear Teva sandals? Well, because Teva sandals has to do with like outside granola. It's not Wall Street, it's not Capitol Hill, right? Like it's a visual cue that is tied to a certain concept. There's David. He's got that manly beard.
You noticed I wasn't. Yeah.
It's like if I wear a shell necklace, right? Like I would look like a '90s douchebag or a '90s kid, right? Like it's just this visual idea that this is what I was talking about earlier. It's a visual heuristic, and that's why I was like, well, it's a placeholder for a lot of information. So it could be true that machines may end up seeing pictures, maybe, but nonetheless. In this example, I think it's because it's tied to innocence. You're not going to see like a beard or like a bald head on a girl, because that's tied to like bald heads are usually tied to like monks or to being older or to being male, that kind of thing. It's just it's a cue, I think, and I think, and I don't know, but I think the salient variable here, the thing that it's tied to most is probably like innocence or superiority. Like we have a thing where we like to. Like teacher, like having sex with teacher or something like that, right? Or people who are in power are more likely to be attractive to us,
right?
Kind of
That's
thing.
why Bill Clinton was such a sexy president, right? Like he was the president, so it's like, yeah, okay, I'm an intern, you're a president, let's do this.
Right? Yeah, you're more likely to see people who are like if maybe like a lion than like a rat, right? Like you don't. Things that are less powerful than us, we don't usually find as attractive. So anyway, I think that's probably what it said. So one is that, they're held in esteem and regard and kind of reverent. And anytime there's something reverent, you're going to find a fetish for that, right?
Like a defiling of it.
Yeah.
Like
nuns. Yeah, sure. I mean, like anything like that, teachers, priests, things like that. But then because it's this idea of something new and fresh. So it pings that part of our brain that like to spread our seed, men. We're like, oh, new and fresh. Yeah, cool. But so probably something like that, and then also the fact that it's probably because it's tied to innocence, and I
think also we're just okay. We're wired, that tribal wiring in us makes us more okay with being shitty to things that are not part of our tribe. So
maybe
that ear marker shows that it's like, okay, well, it's not like it's happening to one of my people. This is a different kind of thing. The same way that we kind of dehumanize minority groups that we want to persecute. We call them like rats or cockroaches or something first.
Yeah.
There might be a dehumanization thing where the pointy ears make it okay to do things that you wouldn't do to a fellow human.
Maybe that would be interesting. Yeah, I would like to test that.
That's terrified with how you would test that, but yes.
No, God, not like like pictures or something, and have people determine if if someone is more or less relatable.
Ear prosthetics, like how often they get raped.
Yeah, we're in 1950s psychologists.
Yeah,
they say anything the fuck they wanted. But
interesting question. Thank you for the user suggestion. Was there anything else you want to talk about with elves and psychology or literature, or how they fit into gaming?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we haven't hit everything. Obviously, we'd have to have like 6 podcasts for that, but I think we've hit the big parts, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you as a closing question: do you have a favorite elf in literature or gaming?
Well, the recency effect right now tells me Solus, but because I think he's interesting, especially like how no spoilers, but how that ends up turning out and some things that happen. It's really cool. But man, do I? Do you?
I was thinking about that, and I remember when I was a kid, my favorite elf from anything was Lorena from Dragonlance, the Golden General. I thought she was
Oh
just super
yeah.
badass. She was like it was a back when having a female general was kind of a novelty. You know, it's like feminism was just taking off.
Which is hilarious because in Star Fox there's a dog general and we're okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine. He's a dog.
The male dog.
He obviously worked his way up through the ranks.
Yeah, makes
But
sense. How about Link? He's Hyrulean.
that was my next thing. When I was a kid was Lorena, but I think Zelda from Twilight Princess would probably be my favorite now, just because I like the way that game portrayed her as kind of this sort of aloof, desperate ruler trying to like keep her country together as the Twilight's coming in, and she's got that cool kind of cloak that made her look really awesome.
Yeah. What a cool game, man. The haters of that game can go fuck off. That game is awesome.
Yeah, I really do like that game. So I don't know, it might be Zelda. And again, Hylian is another kind of elf we didn't touch on because they're basically humans, but they have pointy ears. Culturally, they're not that different from anything you would generically classify as human.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot to think about. That's cool.
Yeah, so let us know if we missed anything, which we definitely did, or if you have some insights you want to share, or who your favorite elf is. But we'll put a poll up on the Facebook group so we can see what you guys think.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. Well, thanks for that. I guess we can move into the feedback section. All right, welcome to the feedback section where we talk about the interactions that we had with the community. And I made a little song out of that. You like that?
Yeah, we should patent that. That's a good song.
Oh, speaking of which, I've got the weirdest. So I didn't. You know how like sometimes you do things and then you realize that that's something other people can't do.
Yes.
That sounds snooty, but I mean worthless.
That's the most Elven thing you've said today.
No, I mean like worthless shit. You know, like some people can. One of the things I can do is beatbox, and it just comes naturally to me. I can't play an instrument. I'm worthless in music, but for some reason I just do it sometimes. And people are like, that's really good. I'm like, what makes it good? Is it like mouth noises or? But apparently, just making up little songs with your face hole is a talent, a completely worthless talent I have. I'll have to do that sometime.
Awesome. Keep doing that. Interactions with our community.
Yeah, that was. See, I told you, I'm musically not gifted.
Yeah, you already demonstrated that. You have a gift for beatboxing and song composition.
But
yeah, we got an email to our thegametheorypodcast@gmail.com address. It's from Joseph. He says, I think I figured you guys out, though. There once was a podcast which spoke of an experiment. It was a sick and twisted experiment in which scientists got rats addicted to drugs and then took them out of their element to see what effect it would have. If I recall, a lot of them died. Let's just say I understand that feeling every time I wake up Monday morning to an empty podcast queue, just saying. But seriously, I know that's got to be hard to keep this up every week, especially with 2 podcasts, but you guys do amazing work. Keep it up. So a little feedback, a little encouragement. We have been missing more episodes than we normally do due to illness and such lately. So sorry for all those rats that are dying of lack of drugs, which is the metaphor we're going to go with now.
The tricky part is I travel a lot, and then also this is like sick time. I thought I looked at my Facebook memories come up. Mm-hmm. Whenever I was sick, this last time a Facebook memory came out and was like, hey, my family's sick, this sucks. And I was like, yeah, what the hell? It's just like this time for some reason around late January and February, our family gets sick. I think it's because the kids are going back to school, and my wife works the kids, and then I work in a university
kids
where
are just vectors of disease.
Oh God, they're just walking. Oh, and they're just cough. They just open mouth cough at you. You can be talking to them, and they're like, and you're like, what the hell?
Why would you do that? Why do you hate me?
What the hell? So anyway, I just always seem to get sick during the sick seasons. I gotta stop working in a university.
Yes,
ridiculous.
For a myriad of reasons.
Yeah, people from all over the state.
Thank you for the encouragement, and we will try to keep it up as consistently as we can, despite the plague and pestilence that afflicts your house. I was reading Greek tragedy. Have you considered that maybe one of your household has offended the gods and Apollo is smiting you with a plague?
That'd be sweet. Yeah, Apollo was the plague dude, man. He was not cool with Didn't he screw over everyone in the Iliad?
Yeah, just fired arrows in everyone in the Trojan War.
Yeah, just got him wrecked. Appreciate that. Yeah, so thanks for the feedback. We will try. It just sucks. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, and for whatever reason, well, for grad school reasons, I'm in crunch time right now, so it sucks. But yeah, we'll do it, man. Thanks for the criticism. We appreciate it. Anything else? No, we got some Twitter stuff, and just like when Russell Glasser came on, someone quoted about it, said they listened to it, thought it was good, and whatnot. So nothing huge, but if you want to, you can tweet us at twitter.com/GameTheoryPod. We're on there. We got some followers and some people who occasionally tweeted us.
Yes, and I said this in the beginning, but just another shout out to Calvin, one of our listeners, who gave us both a copy of Undertale. So we will hopefully get Jeremiah's copy fixed so that we can discuss it more in depth in a later episode. I'd love to do an episode on Undertale. There's a lot to talk about in that game. So thank you for that.
Yes, I do appreciate that. That's awesome. Really, really generous. Yeah, and I will get it working. It's just a matter of time. I just haven't had a lot of that. But anyway, thanks for that. That's awesome. And also, you can go join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/GameTheoryPodcast. Yeah, and obviously you can email us at thegametheorypodcast@gmail.com, and we will check that. We check that before every show, and we talk it over. So I think that's it, man. That probably wraps up the Elves episode. I called it Elves Are Dumb for now, but you can change it whenever you edit it.
That'll get clicks.
Okay. Cool. But other than that, I guess we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.